We talked about the environmental and internal and external environment and changes that happen to damage cells. So sometimes changes to the environment or the DNA or other changes require that the cells adapt, groups of cells adapt. And we're going to talk about the different types of cellular adaptations. Same learning objectives. So the difference, we're going to talk about the difference between plasia and trophy. So, hyperplasia and hypertrophy, two different things. So when we're talking about adaptation, a lot of times the word that is used is plasticity. Plasticity is the ability to change. And the process of plasticity is plasia. So like when we say neoplasia, it's new growth. So plasia is often growth. The adjective that goes with that is plastic. So if we're talking about neoplastic cells, it's cells that are changing by growing more cells. So plasia, plastic, plasticity, those all go together. And then with trophy, it's the cells are growing or not growing, depending. So trophic is usually growth, trophy. So let's talk about the different plasias and trophies. So cells adapt when they're faced with environmental changes, DNA changes, increased or decreased demand. So an example that probably all of us are familiar with is muscle hypertrophy. When you increase the demand on muscle by working out, you increase the cells get stronger because of that increased demand. If you are completely sedentary and you don't use your muscles, the cells get smaller because of decreased demand, and that's atrophy. Chronic stress or irritation can also cause cells to adapt, and we'll talk about different ways that that happens. So adaptation can be beneficial or harmful depending on the circumstances. So plasia is a change in the cell number or organization. So it's usually increase or decrease. And the name is going to tell you. Hyperplasia is increased cell number. So the physical example here is callus formation. So let's say that I'm learning to play the guitar. I'm learning to play the steel guitar because I just think steel guitars sound cool. So I'm doing different things with I'm using my fingers on the frets and I'm using my fingers on the strings in different ways, and I develop calluses in response to that stress, and that's hyperplasia. Hypoplasia is decreased cell number, and sometimes that can be congenital. So some people are just born with smaller kidneys or smaller hearts or smaller livers, and that's considered hypoplasia. Um, Aplasia is missing organ or tissue. So some people are born without certain things or with one kidney, aplasia is missing. Neoplasia is an abnormal proliferation, also known as a tumor. So when we talk about neoplastic processes, that's tumor growth, and a neoplasm is a new growth or a tumor. Dysplasia is a change in the cell appearance. Something goes weird with the cells. Metaplasia is when one cell converts to a different cell. One cell type converts to a different cell type, and we'll talk about examples. Anaplasia is loss of cell organization. A lot of times, anaplastic cells are immature cells with undeveloped nuclei and not as many organelles. So in a neoplasm or a tumor, you might have dysplastic cells or anaplastic cells that show up weird when you look at them under the microscope. Abnormal architecture and arrangement. In Prosoplasia, it's new cell function development. So this happens in neuroplasticity within the nervous system where a cell develops a new talent, basically. And sometimes that has to happen. You get functional reorganization after an injury. The cells that survived had to take on the jobs of the other cells, which that can be a good adaptation sometimes. Desmoplasia is connective tissue growth. You have something is changing with the connective tissue. So if you think about hyperplasia is more cells, hypoplasia are fewer cells. Aplasia is no cells, or missing cells. Neoplasia is a new growth. Dysplasia is weird cells. Metaplasia is different cells. Anaplasia is immature, undeveloped cells. Prosoplasia is new cell function, cells developing new talents. And desmoplasia is changes in the connective tissue. And that happens with some disease processes, which we'll talk about. So trophy on the other side, so plasia has to do with cell number or the organization of the cell. Um, Trophy has to do with cell size. So hypertrophy, you don't get more muscle cells, the cells just increase in volume. So you have bigger, stronger cells sometimes. Hypotrophy is decreased cell volume, so the cells are smaller. And atrophy is decreased function and cell size and number. So atrophy is never good. Um, a biotrophy is the loss of tissue vitality in an organ or tissue. So bio is like the function, biological function. And so something has gone wrong. The tissue is just not functioning at optimal levels. Dystrophy is a degenerative disorder from poor nutrition. So any kind of degenerative disorder from improper or faulty nutrition is considered dystrophy. So the example, muscle hypertrophy from exercise, that's good. Muscle atrophy from disuse, that could be problematic. So you can think hypertrophy is strong cells, hypotrophy is weak cells, atrophy is fewer cells or decreased function. A biotrophy is the tissues aren't doing their job, and dystrophy is poor nutrition, degenerative disorder. And that's cell nutrition. That doesn't necessarily mean individual human nutrition, but the cells are being deprived of nutrition in some manner. So when we put in this diagram the plasias and the trophies are sort of mixed. So normal cells, atrophy is smaller, weaker cells. Hyperplasia is more cells. Dysplasia is weird cells. They might be precancerous. Hypertrophy is bigger cells. Metaplasia is different cells. And neoplasia is more and weird cells, and that's a malignancy or a tumor. So here are some clinical examples of the adaptations. So beneficial adaptations can be like muscle hypertrophy from strength training. Love that. Callus formation from repetitive friction. So I'm learning to play my steel guitar and now I can play it for hours and it doesn't because I have those protective calluses, it doesn't hurt my fingers. Bone density increase from weight bearing exercise. Yes, ma'am, we want that. So those are beneficial adaptations. Harmful adaptations, cardiac muscle hypertrophy. Why is your cardiac muscle getting bigger? Is it working too hard? You're at risk for heart failure, and we'll talk extensively about that. Vascular or smooth muscle hypertrophy can be caused by hypertension. So if you're constantly have high blood pressure, your arteries have to work harder, the muscles, and you get hypertrophy, and that's not good. Metaplasia in smokers' lungs can be precancerous, and so that's when the normal cells in the lungs get replaced by more resilient or more tough cells to put up with all the smoke they're having to inhale. Or maybe if you lived in Victorian London and you were inhaling a lot of smoke, you had metaplasia in your lungs. I don't know, they couldn't tell back then. So in metaplasia, here's our example of smoker's lungs. So it's different cells, conversion from one cell type to another. So normally inside of our lungs and respiratory passages, we have columnar epithelial cells with cilia that are hopefully filtering some of the stuff that we're breathing in through our lungs. But when you're constantly bombarding them with smoke, they change to squamous epithelial cells with no cilia. So it loses that protective function, that sort of filtering particle function. And the risk is it's a precancerous condition. It can then develop into small cell lung cancer. We don't like that. So understanding tissue changes helps explain functional limitations. So this person who has changes in their tissues from smoking, they're going to have more difficulty breathing.